Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm at AK Stormageddon.
And you're listening to our 2023 Year in Review special. And 2023 has certainly been a year in gaming, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just telling Geoff before we started recording that I was listening to last year's episode because we're changing the format a little bit this year, adding some stuff. I think with the growth of the Patreon and some other things, we've wanted to revamp this episode and go a little deeper, maybe make it a little longer. But last year started with the journalism loss. And now, not as much journalism loss this year as last year because there are just less outlets, as depressing as that is to say out loud. But the development and creator and social media manager loss for game studios is immeasurable, not just looking at stuff like Embracer Group that just lays off whole hog studios because they feel like it the week of Christmas.
Right.
But over the course of the year, I think I lost count somewhere around 600 layoffs, but there's definitely been more since then. It's just kind of impossible to wrap my brain around, and I feel incredibly awful for those folks working in that field. I hope that everyone's able to bounce back and find other gigs, but you have to imagine as there are less studios. Like some of these layoffs are just studios laying off people, but the studios are still trucking on. But Some of them have been complete studio shutdowns, like Deep Silver. They got completely shut down after the new Saints Row remake came out because it didn't perform well, and some other things. It's a bummer. I don't really know how to sugarcoat it. I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about this year or games of the year without talking about this loss. I don't really have much to add to it other than it sucks, and we can't just talk about what we loved in gaming. And thankfully, my favorite outlets and podcasters haven't been. They've been bringing this stuff to the forefront. Not that there's much we can per se do about it, but it definitely does suck and is worth remembering in this great year of games to play. It was not a great year for the games industry as an industry.
It speaks more to issues that are bigger than video game studios and other issues within the entertainment industry in general. But you're right, Matt. It would not be right to not at least acknowledge these things, not talk about the fact that the endless search for line go up and profit and being beholden to shareholders, or the idea therein, it's far riskier when it's a venture like a video game where it could take anywhere from a year to 10 years to develop a product and the expectations of what it needs to be, what it should be, and who's behind it and who's making these decisions versus who you keep. And it's frustrating. So, yeah, a lot of good games and a lot of bad decisions made by people who run the people who make them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point to make that it's reflective of, I think, labor in the U.S. as a whole. There was the huge actor and writer strike over the summer through a chunk of the fall that only ended very recently as of when we're recording last year. I think there's a labor problem in this country, and this is more than to get into on this podcast, but I think the layoffs in the games industry is reflective of that. It's always people at the bottom of the totem pole getting laid off, where the executives continue to get raises and bonuses and all that other stuff. You know, I can't remember his name, but the idiot who runs Epic Games talks about how it's the best year for gaming ever, and then that how they'll never lay off employees and how these layoffs are terrible, and then does it anyway.
Then lays off, was it like 600, 800 employees, something like that?
Some nonsense. It was a percentage of the whole company, and it's just, it's sacrifice the little to keep the ship floating, and it doesn't work, and it's not fair. And one of the things that I love about Nintendo, they are not a perfect company, is that the year that Iwata took a huge pay cut to keep employees and prevent layoffs, and Nintendo has done stuff like that in the past, and those are the kinds of things that should be happening. But also, Geoff and I don't run a company, so I guess what the hell do we know? But I do want to shift gears and talk about something a little more positive and talk about this podcast and its growth this year. We've had a complete year of Patreon, which has been really exciting. Thank you to the 23 members we have and the 15 paid members. We are grateful for each and every one of you on any level, including the free level.
Yes, thank you so much.
I think it's been a great success. I think there are things I would have done differently, but I think there's also some cool stuff that I want to do this year that I think will work really well. We've talked about rejiggering some of the tiers, and I'm still working on that. Essentially giving some folks some access to more stuff. The exclusive stuff, maybe making some more exclusive stuff, we'll see. But I think that once we shifted gears to the monthly episodes about halfway through the year and just kind of chatting about what we've been up to for the month, I think that's been a lot of fun. I do want to get back to doing reviews, either individually or together. I think they were a lot of fun, but I think they were a lot easier to do in January through June and not so much when the year ramped up.
Yep, more or less. That's, yeah, exactly.
I've also enjoyed exploring my article writing again in the Patreon. I've gotten a lot of really great feedback, and I'm grateful for that. I think that it's something I do want to continue to explore in the new year, and I'm grateful to have a platform to kind of play with this. And I don't know how that will evolve quite yet. I'm hoping to write for other sites. I've had a few offers, nothing for the major publications. I haven't done any freelance work yet, but this is a way to build up a portfolio that if I wanted to take on another thing, I could. But I think it's really helped us shape the podcast for how we want to grow it and continue to evolve it. I have a ton of other podcasters to thank for that who already had Patreons and whose example we were able to follow and consult with. One of those folks is someone we've mentioned quite a few times. But when I was starting the Patreon, talking to Dave Jackson, who had already had one for the Tube Podcast Network, which is literally just his 2 podcasts, he was really a great resource for kind of bouncing ideas off of, and he's bounced some ideas off us. And so I want to especially shout him out and thank him for that. But I'm really happy with what we've been able to do, and I'm excited to see what we can do this year, now having a full year behind us, and how we continue to evolve it and use those funds to grow the show and get equipment and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have any of our fancier AV equipment in time for going to MagFest. Also, we're not going to MagFest on press because I don't think they really do press badges. So any sort of interview we do there is going to be more guerrilla anyway. And I feel that's in the spirit of MagFest. But by
true.
PAX East, we will be able to have a more professional sheen to the work that we do outside of these recordings, thanks to our Patreon. Thank you very much, kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Also, we were able to dabble in some other things like polls. It's how we kind of started leading our console retrospective conversation, which I think is a fun way to do it because we want to do every console anyway. So letting the listeners pick is kind of fun to predict the trajectory. We may do that for like genre retrospectives and even franchise retrospectives in the future as well. But it's been fun to kind of have the listeners guide that a bit, and is going to lead to a very interesting episode this month when we talk about the Game Gear, which won in our first ever recorded called fight on Street Fighter 6 between the Game Gear and the PSP, which was also a lot of fun to make. And we want to do more video stuff, but like anything else, it takes a lot of work, and neither of us are professional video editors. So that, if it comes, will come slowly.
Yeah, pretty much.
But that's been really fun. And we have some fun plans for future console retrospectives and other kinds of polls and listener guided stuff. But as Geoff said, we couldn't do this without you guys, and we're super grateful for it. I also want to throw out there that in this year of 2023, although this is coming out in 2024, we do this to ourselves every time we record in the end of December. It airs in the beginning of January. So if we say this year or the wrong year, bear with us.
It is both Yakuza and Like a Dragon.
Correct. Yes, exactly. The perfect analogy. But we did release 24 main show episodes, which of course we do because there are 52 weeks in a year and we do them bi-weekly. That math was really easy to do.
That's 26.
Shush. All right, so we did 26 episodes. Anyway, but I also did do the math on side quests. We released 77 episodes of side quests this year, which is always insane to me that I can get out that much work. The number may be off by 1 or 2 because I think we have missed some episodes here and there, but I tried to do the math as accurately as possible. But still, math errors aside, is an impressive amount of stuff to put out. The side quest series wouldn't be a success without literally everyone who listens and everyone who participates. We can't thank every guest individually, but if you record an episode of SideQuest or guested on the main show, we are endlessly grateful for you because you help make this show what it is. What's been fun about this podcast is that Geoff and I don't have like a plan for the year usually. We have like a broad idea of some of the stuff we want to do, but like Patreon has kind of forced us to plan ahead in a way that, let's say, we weren't great at before.
We're still not great at it, but we're better. We didn't. You're right. We didn't have a thing to come back to, a home, a thing to focus on. We have always had these episodes to discuss and talk, but having trajectory is probably the best word for it. And certainly the Patreon has been handy for that, to have a question to answer and not just go, well, we should answer some questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. That also something I want to bring back more in 2024 is getting more listener feedback per episode. We've done it before, especially with the console retrospectives, which I think has been great, getting people to share their stories and stuff. I want to do more of that as well because I love that interactivity and we have an incredible community, and I love when we get to feature them on the show as well. But I think we've put it off long enough. One of the big changes to our year in review episode is I wanted to discuss our full top 10 lists In the past, we haven't because we were like, oh, it would take too long or might be too much. But honestly, it's our show and it could be long if we wanted to. And more importantly, I realized that besides the odd game that Geoff and I talk about, but as we talked about it more in our monthly episodes for the Patreon, where we just talk about what we've been playing, is Geoff and I don't really get to comment a ton on what each other's been playing and the favorites of the year. And so, along with shifting our Twitter threads to articles on the Patreon, which I think is a much better format, to be honest, and I'm glad that we have it because I think that the articles look way better there at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also a fun way for us to react to each other's stuff without just after the fact sending a Discord message going, hey, great list.
Right.
Which is usually what it amounts to when we did the Twitter threads. And so, we'll both start with some honorable mentions if we have them, and then we will dive into our top 10 going from 10 to 1. But I do want to shout out a ton of games that were not on my top 10, which kind of tells you something about the quality of games we got this year. Not to mention I played a ton of old games as well, because of course I did. But like my honorable mentions in no particular order, and you've seen them if you've read my article, is Resident Evil 4 Remake, Chained Echoes, Disco Elysium, Iron Lung, Romancevania, Like a Dragon Ishin, Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster, Street Fighter VI Gunbrella, Metroid Prime Remaster, Final Fantasy XVI Signalis, and Coffee Talk Episode 2 Hibiscus and Butterfly. Some of those games you'll remember I wouldn't shut up about when they came out, and yet now they didn't even make my top 10, which I think is kind of funny in retrospect.
Yeah, a little bit. Just kind of goes to show the sort of year that this has been. And I would say honorable mentions, we've got a lot of crossover. I almost feel like when probably the next day or so after we finish up recording this, when I put out my top 10 article, I think I kind of also want to put out an article of an apology to 10 games that I didn't get to either start playing them, play enough of them. My top 10 newest backlog loomers of 2023, Yeah. I did not get a chance to play Dave the Diver or Dredge or Chance of Sinar, but those are all games just off the top of my head that I'm like, I need to play those. I want to play those. I want to play Viewfinder, and it's not that long of a game. And these are all titles that I've heard great things about or that pop up, and I want to give them their due, both in the amount of time that I give them and in singing their praises to all y'all. And so I feel like those are just as much of a thing, I haven't played Stray Gods yet. I was so excited for Stray Gods. And the very concept of it is fantastic and deserves a shout out. And so there's a lot of those. I feel like more importantly for my honorable mentions are those games.
Yeah, sure. And I have those too. I got a bunch of great Steam gifts. I was in a bunch of Steam sales. And so I finally got Cyberpunk 2077 and Cocoon and Chance of Sinar. And it's funny, in my Secret Santa group, there was 8 of us. 3 different people got Chance of Sinar, which I think is just telling about the importance of that game as well as how many people want to play it. But yeah, Dave the Diver, I also didn't play. There's so many of them. And I think we'll never be able to cover everything in a given year, but I think this year especially we felt the pull of oh my God, there's so much. I mean, I got codes for stuff that I never even touched.
Yeah, I haven't played through 9 Years of Shadow yet. And also the other big honorable mention for me in terms of old game, new game, whatever, is the Castlevania update to Dead Cells.
Yeah.
Dead Cells was a game that was sitting in my backlog, and then they came out with that. I played it at a friend's house. Fuck, they got me. So good. But not on my top 10.
No, yeah. I mean, there's so many of those. There are games that I probably didn't even mention in my honorable mentions that I played this year that I enjoyed. And of course, as of when we're recording, I have the Switch paused on the final boss, is Persona 5 Royal, a game that I swore I'd finish during our winter break. And as of now, I'm assuming I will, but I guess you'll know better in the future. But I do love that very long RPG.
It is an adventure and a half. And from what you were telling me, you took less time on it than I did, 50 hours fewer. It's still a long game, still over 100 hours. I
spent probably a lot less time in Mementos. I probably spent a lot less time doing side stuff. And I also played on easy for a portion of it and then on normal for a portion. And I'm beating the final boss on safe mode because I've had enough and I just want to see the ending. Judge me if you will. I have no regrets.
I mean, once you're powerful enough, driving through Mementos, you can just run over shadows and get the personas and experience from it. And
yes.
I didn't spend hours doing that at a time, but I probably did hours total. It's satisfying, okay? There's a feeling of power that comes from reaching the late stage parts of an RPG and trouncing earlier areas. give me life, okay?
No, it's legit. And I learned that probably in the last 10 hours of the game. So, better late than never, I guess. Let's get on to our official top 10 lists. And of course, my number 10, as y'all know, is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. A lot of people's number 1 is my number 10 because it's still building off a game that I didn't love. I liked Breath of the Wild, but I love Tears of the Kingdom, so why it made my top 10.
Well, Tears of the Kingdom is number 7 for me, so we'll discuss it a little more in depth when we get to that.
Sounds great. So why don't we talk about your number 10 then?
My number 10 is probably my big cheat of the list, and it's Persona 4 Golden, because it technically had a console release at the very beginning of this year.
Sure.
And you may have spent over 100 hours on Persona 5 Royal, but I am at 120 and counting in Persona 4 Golden right now. I played it last year, I think. I then played my second and third playthrough the back half of this year, playing it with Sarah for the second playthrough, and I'm now doing a New Game Plus. I've never done a New Game Plus on a Persona game. Yeah, you spend over 100 hours on a game and you want to do more? Yeah, yes I do. It's got a lot of PS2-ness about it. The writing is very 2009, for better or for worse, but it's probably one of the better holistic, I guess, RPG parties. And I've played a lot of turn-based RPGs, and you have those things where I love the party, I like these people, and you have your favorites. But I think as far as the investigation team, Persona 4, there's no misses here. You like some, you dislike some at more or less at varying points, but in 3 playthroughs, I have new favorites every time, and I'm seeing new things. The battle system in Persona is wonderful. I do miss baton passes because I played 5 before playing 4. The game's not built for it. It's not designed to do that. And so even after beating it multiple times and even taking my old personas into a new playthrough, there's still challenge. There's still thrills to it. And I'm still enjoying myself. So that's my number 10, where it's more than an honorable mention. It's a little bit of a sneaking it in there, but I think it's worthy of note. And I'm glad that more people are getting an opportunity to play it.
For sure. I mean, it's on my list. I'd started it on my Steam Deck a while ago, but I think I may end up picking up a digital version on my Switch because, predictable. But I don't know when I'll jump into that because I want to leave myself available for Reload, 3 Reload when that comes out this year,
Yes.
which is coming out very soon. I mean, Persona 4, what I played of it, I loved, and I am unsurprised that you spent so much time in it. I'm curious, isn't the main story only 60 hours in that game?
Give or take, there's fewer big cutscenes. It is a little less whooshy cinematic. And I think that's part of it. But yeah, it's probably about a 60 to 80 hour story if you're thorough.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, I will eventually play it. I think it's safe to say that I will hopefully play it in 2024, but I've also started a backlog list that I'm keeping track of games I specifically want to beat this year. And so I may be digging my own grave, but we'll see.
Well, putting on a portable system that you'll probably take around more like the Switch, I think that'll make it a lot easier.
Well, we'll see if I get to it this year, but it's definitely high on my list, especially since our favorite best friend, Yuri Lowenthal, voices a character in it. It is definitely on the list, but there's some other stuff I want to get to first, and also feel like between one of my most anticipated games of the year coming out in January, another one coming out in April, both of them being big RPGs, seems unlikely that I will dive into a longer RPG, at least in the beginning part of the year.
Right.
But we shall see. Well, let's move on to my number 9. My number 9 is Dredge. Is Dredge on your list, Geoff?
It is not. It is definitely on my I'm sorry honorable mentions list.
Well, Dredge is the debut game by Black Salt Games. It is one of my favorite games of the year. And what I love about it is it takes the life sim kind of stuff that I tend to like for a while and then bounce off of, but wrapped it in a nice piece of Cthulhu wrapping paper. It is very in that vein of horror. It was my entry into accepting horror into my heart this year, which I wrote an article about. And it's spooky more than scary and more nerve-wracking than scary, but I still really enjoyed it. The story is great. It's got some cool twists. And for an indie game that is by a new studio and it being a brand new game, a brand new IP, it had a lot to really hook me. I don't know that I would ever need a sequel for it, but like another game in this vein where you're like managing inventory, upgrading your boat. So like maybe upgrading a thing and then finding narrative while doing it would be really interesting. But like they've hooked me. It's a debut game from a studio that now I will buy every game from until I find something I don't like. It's something special that I don't think enough people played. And I'm hoping that in the years to come, more people will dive in. I see this as a good holiday Steam sale gift for all my friends as it goes on sale.
It hooked you? People should dive in. Matt.
All right. Look, it wasn't on purpose, but yes, the puns are there.
It's fine. I caught it.
Boo.
Yes!
If you haven't checked out Dredge yet and you've played Dave the Diver or not, this is a very different fishing-based indie game. Although, again, the arguments aside that Dave the Diver isn't really an indie game, neither here nor there. But I'm hoping, like I said, Dave the Diver is on my shame list from this year, and I'm hoping to get to that in 2024. But yeah, Dredge is my number 9.
My number 9 will be the last time I talk in depth about Atlas or Persona games during this episode. What actually was a new release this year was Persona 5 Tactica.
Yes.
And that's my number 9. As has already been established here, I'm Persona trash, but also I do love tactical RPGs and have been missing them in my life. I mean, I fell into tactical RPGs back with Final Fantasy Tactics, and for a while there, I was having a real problem with gacha games playing a gacha version of Final Fantasy Tactics on my phone. It's taking up a lot of my time and a lot of my battery. I've now sworn off those sorts of games for a lot of reasons. I bring this up because Persona 5 Tactica kind of scratched that itch in the same way, especially because it's got characters I love. Is it the deepest tactical combat? No, not necessarily, but I don't need it to be. I enjoy the vibe. I enjoy the world. It's got new soundtrack pieces that are fantastic, and the strategic pieces that they open up, I'm always fascinated to see when a franchise or characters are adapted into a different genre, especially when there are strong gameplay mechanics from their home game, home franchise, and to see how those play out. Another game that I played this year was Persona Q on the 3DS, and how they translated sort of the pressing mechanic, the one more that Persona has, where if you hit an enemy with a critical hit or their weakness, you get to take another action. How that plays out in Persona Q is different than how it plays out in Persona 5 Tactica. And if you've knocked down everybody, you get to do an all-out attack. Well, they're not all lined up in front of you. They're all over the field, and you're never going to knock all of them down. So how does that play out? And they have a whole new thing where your positioning is just as important, but you still have to down enemies. And there is a nice evolution of where they open up the skill tree for you and where they allow new mechanics. Some of them are accessible before they tell you, but a lot of them are you need to progress the story. And there's been a lot of indie RPGs that I've played a little bit of here and there, and they're so ready to give you your entire skill tree at once and access to everything and just go. There's something to be said for a slow burn. And Persona 5 Tactica is not a 100-hour game, far from it, but it is a very enjoyable one. And for me personally, because this is my list, made me very happy, and that's why it's my number 9.
Nice. Yeah, Persona 5 Tactica is something I was interested in, but of course I know it takes place post the ending of the original Persona 5. I don't believe it includes the Royal content, which is interesting.
It doesn't necessarily. Royal content has always been a little bit wonky with that. Some characters from Royal sort of make appearances and are sort of there, and as far as timeline goes, I think it sort of takes place about a week after Royal ends.
Yeah, it's supposed to be right after. And so it's been on my list. I'm not a huge tactics fan. I'm learning to love tactics games. I really liked Mario & Rabbids, and I got about halfway through the sequel without finishing it, which I do need to go back to. I've played other tactic games. Obviously, I've never shut up about Fire Emblem Three Houses and how much Claude I love and how he should have been mine. And anyway, I am really interested to play Tactica. Did you get Tactica on the Switch or on the PlayStation?
I got on the Switch.
How does it run? It runs really well.
It runs pretty well. Sometimes loading up the battles takes up a little bit of time, but otherwise, I think also given that my first tactical RPG was Final Fantasy Tactics on the PS1, there can be quality of life updates that are over a decade old, but if they're better than that one, I'm like, oh, this is so convenient. And there's a lot of those. You are able to undo a move, start the whole turn again, or restart the whole battle. And that's on normal difficulty.
Oh, nice.
And you don't lock in actions until you have locked in actions. You can move around as much as you need to. You can place people as you need to. It's a little closer to Mario and Rabbids, I would say, than Fire Emblem. Although Fire Emblem is more forgiving than it used to be.
That's true. It's on my short list. I don't know when I'll get to it, but now having hopefully finished Persona 5 Royal, I will jump into it at some point because I do like tactics games when they are more forgiving. I've wanted to try some of the more complicated ones like XCOM and stuff. I will at some point. I actually think I have a copy of XCOM 2. And of course, I have Marvel's Midnight Suns, which I have not dove into yet, but I've been wanting to for a while. And so this is like part of that. Maybe 2024 will be the year of tactics. Maybe I'll play a bunch of tactics games. We'll see. Maybe we'll also hear more on that rumored Final Fantasy Tactics remake.
They did a remake of it. It was called War of the Lions. It was on the PSP. Loading times were atrocious. If they do another one, that'd be great.
Yeah. Let's move on to my number 8, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I'm pretty sure that I'm the only one who played that of the two of us this year.
Yes, unfortunately for me.
Yes, I highly recommend the Jedi series if you've not played either of them, Geoff. I know I've never shut up about Fallen Order once I played it.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about Jedi Survivor and why it's a little higher on my list than those other two games is because it is the ideal sequel. They took everything that I loved about Fallen Order and kept it, and then took everything that was kind of an issue or complaint about Fallen Order and made it better. A bigger hub world, better load times, more variety of combat stances, better enemy design, AI design, fights, set pieces. It took what was a good story and a good game and made it better on every level. I will never understand how I can wield my lightsaber like a two-handed broadsword, how my lightsaber gets heavier, but I don't care because it's fun to do. We had so many games this year that were the best looking game ever. And like then the next one was the best looking game ever. And it's kind of astonishing to me that things continue to be that incredibly built. But yeah, this is one of my favorite Star Wars properties, easily one of my favorite Star Wars video games. And I think one of my favorite versions of playing as a Jedi. We've had many games where you got to do some amazing things as a Jedi, but this feels the most true to what they've envisioned all these years. You know, I love the Force Unleashed like anybody else. I think it was fun to have those over the top powers, but there's something about how measured Cal is while still experiencing some pulls to the dark side a little bit and dabbling in some of those powers. I think it is easily one of the strongest entries in the Star Wars oeuvre. And in a year where there's a lot of Star Wars stuff and I'm trying to keep up and failing terribly, I still haven't watched all of Andor or Ahsoka. I think besides The Mandalorian, this might be one of my favorite recent Star Wars franchise for sure.
I think because it also plays into a little bit of the original genre trappings of Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars, yes, has its Flash Gordon space opera in there, but it also has its Westerns and its samurai films to it too, which is why, for me, and I know I'm not alone, at the outset, The Mandalorian appealed so much because it was a Western. The man with no name wandering. And Cal has to be on the run.
Yeah.
I need to play a bit of Fallen Order to further this notion, but from the outside, my brain sort of goes, I mean, most of the time when you play as a video game protagonist, we accept reality beyond reality. And I think your average video game protagonist that has jump physics plays like a Jedi is supposed to be in a Star Wars game.
Yeah.
So to have a grounded Jedi feels correct because it's like, oh, they just feel like a video game protagonist. Yeah, but video game protagonists don't move like people do. So let's just kind of bring this together a little. So I'm excited to try it out. I do love Star Wars.
The platforming in the games are really great. It's not always perfect, but I love climbing in these games. I love exploring in these kinds of games. It is very rewarding to do that as Cal, and you do get bonuses both in Fallen Order and in Survivor to enhance that kind of stuff and that traversal. So that's been nice. Not the best traversal this year. We'll get to that, but definitely still fun to move around in the space. As Cal, also, this game's got BD1, and there's no beating BD1, the best droid ever made. Like, I'm sorry they made droids cuter. Not possible, and yet they did. So shout out to BD1.
It's not a good Star Wars video game without a good droid. Statement. HK-47 would like to have words with you.
Yeah. But moving on to your number 8.
My number 8 is one of your honorable mentions, Gunbrella.
Nice.
Gunbrella is not the first game from Doinksoft Studios. Came out with Demon Throttle, the physical-only video game, also put out by Devolver Digital. Both of these games are put out by Devolver. Gunbrella is a delightful indie title that also has a little bit of eldritchness to it. I enjoy, certainly in indie games, when systems support each other and fold in on top of each other. And the idea of a gunbrella, which, if you haven't pieced it together, if you haven't played the game, it is a gun that is also an umbrella. And in all of the fantastical ways that you think of an umbrella, yes, it does slow your fall. Yes, it does shield you. And yes, you can use those two ideals together to air dash in all sorts of directions. Dual stick controls, you're able to aim the gun any which way. You can load it with different ammunition, and you are on a gritty tale of revenge where it's a bit dystopian. It's a bit of a world that isn't ours at all. It's not a true Metroidvania, but that's fine. Actually, I prefer that. It reminds me of one of my favorite games from last year, Infernax.
Yes.
Where there are moral choices, but it's not necessarily every conversation determines whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. It's not a full-on Metroidvania where everywhere you shoot there's hidden walls and things to break down, but there are secrets to explore and there are side quests to fulfill. The way that the titular item, the gunbrella, moves, works is also deeply satisfying traversal. The whole time I'm playing it, reminded of learning how to do the weird shield dash cancel movement in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where you backdash and hold out your shield repeatedly so that you just moonwalk at insane speeds. And I was figuring out the fastest, most efficient way to move around, and was really appreciating the beauty of the world, the quality of the characters. There's a lot of dark humor to it, and I love that. And I think this kind of adventure game, it touches to a lot of my old favorites. It's a little bit of open, but it's lock and key open world. It's not a long playthrough. It was a lot of fun. There are sometimes binary choices, and sometimes the moral choices you make have nothing to do with dialogue choices. And sometimes you get to take a third option. And I appreciated and loved all of those. And it was a great game on its own. It reminded me of a lot of other great games that I've played. And I think that's a testament to the game and certainly nothing against it. The story's a little thin, but they don't lean hard on that. The story for them is more the world and, yeah, the gunbrella. Gunbrella, good.
Yeah, I loved it. It killed me not to keep it on my top 10. It was in my top 10 for a lot of the year. I love Ubisoft as well. I'm going to reference their other game, Gato Roboto, which is one of the best little Metroidvanias.
That's right, that is them.
Yes, one of the best little Metroidvanias. Tone is the same. Dark humor. I love the way that characters talk in these games where they have this kind of warble that sounds like a human voice, but isn't. It's not voice acted, but it's a less annoying kind of like Banjo-Kazooie, like there's a sound to represent the voice kind of thing.
But it is distinct to each of the characters, and that actually plays out in a very heartbreaking way in an optional side quest you can take.
Yeah. The story is, I think, really interesting, even though it is, I agree, a little thin. The final boss took me ages to beat, but was like a really cool set piece.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like Geoff and I talk about often, the meat and potatoes, the movement, the traversal, and the combat was so satisfying in this game, had really strong platforming. There were some times where I wanted to throw my Switch across the room because the platforming gets a little tight. But I think no worse than similar offenders like The Messenger and games like it, where you're meant to be punished a little bit if you want to explore that way. I think it really does a solid job. What I love about Ubisoft so far, just based on the 2 games by them that I've played, is that they have a shtick and then they build a game around it. And I think it's a really great way to game design. Gato Roboto obviously is about a cat operating a tiny mech and exploring and trying to save his owner. And I think this game also building the gunbrella and then building the game around it, and interesting characters, because the lead character, I think, in this game becomes a very interesting character, though you know so little about him at the start of the game. This is the second game that I played this year that has that kind of mysterious protagonist, because Dredge was the same way. And I like when indie games do that. We don't get a lot of AAA games that do that, though some do. But yeah, I agree. Gunbrella, good. I think it was really finely tuned and well made, and I will buy anything Ubisoft makes from now on because I've loved both of their games to death. All right, my number 7 is Like a Dragon, Gaiden, the man who erased his name, the longest video game title ever. I know that you didn't get around to this one this year, though I know you did want to play it.
I did play the demo, and it was a lot of fun.
I do want to shout out, of course, 47 for providing me with a review code. They're really great. This game, I didn't expect to end up on my top 10. It was marketed as an interquel. It was marketed as this game that was linking together the two new Like a Dragon RPGs and also kind of bringing Kiryu's storyline, one of the main characters of the franchise for a long time, Kazuma Kiryu, to like an end. It's not ending in this game, but it was starting to wrap up his story. As we see, there's a clear passing of the torch narrative, at least in Yakuza Like a Dragon and seemingly in Infinite Wealth coming soon as well. This game justifies its existence by its ending and not in a cheap way. It's a shorter experience. It's only 16 to 18 hours if you kind of bull through it. I don't want to spoil. I haven't cried this hard at an ending in my entire life, like ugly crying. Like it was, and it's not a sad ending either. So I'll throw that out the window. But I also don't know that it would be as satisfying to someone who hasn't spent the last 3 years living this character's life. As I've said many times before, I played from Yakuza 0 all the way through Yakuza Like a Dragon within the last few years. And to do those stories back to back and then get to this, such a perfect encapsulation of this character, a really great send-off game, I'm floored by it. And I cannot wait for Infinite Wealth. I love this franchise. As I say, whenever I list my rankings for this franchise, even the worst game is still one of the best games I've ever played. And I have zero other studios that I can make that claim about. Literally, not another video game studio that I like never misses like this, not with such a deep catalog as well.
And with such large games.
Yeah. So if you are a fan of Kazuma Kiryu, if you're a fan of RGG Studios and these games, I highly recommend you play it. I do think someone like you, Geoff, who knows the legacy of Kiryu just through word of mouth and having played Yakuza Like a Dragon, God, this naming convention will eventually kill me. I think you will still get something out of this game, and I think it is definitely still worth you playing. And if you can manage to eke it out in January before Infinite Wealth comes out, I would highly recommend it. I think it's worth it. It's on the shorter side, and I think while it doesn't have great sub-stories, it has some of the best beat-em-up combat, I think, in the history of the franchise, which says something, since Yakuza 0 is also pretty incredible.
Yeah.
It was just such a great send-off to one of now my favorite video game characters as well in Kazuma Kiryu. So I can't recommend Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, enough. Also, this month, a Tales from the Backlog episode will be dropping with myself and Flora Marigold joining Dave to talk about this incredible game. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Well, I've got about 3 weeks from the time this episode drops to get through it before Infinite Wealth, so who knows?
I'm optimistic, but I will say that you won't be missing anything if you do jump into Infinite Wealth, it seems. This kind of like fills in the gaps between those two games and what Kiryu's been up to since 6. But I think it's a worthwhile adventure. And because it's on the shorter side, something you might be able to get through, since Sarah has made it pretty clear that she's not 100% on board with playing the beat-em-up games, but loved the RPG.
And if nothing else, we can take the Ichiban approach of just following him and going, who the hell's this guy?
Yeah, pretty much. That's true.
And still having a great time.
Exactly.
So my number 7, as previously mentioned, was Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. So here's our chance to talk about it a little more. I do enjoy when a game is able to sort of talk about what happens after you've already saved the world.
Yeah.
And other Zelda games, there's very few direct sequels, and none of them have reckoned within the same world in quite the same way. And I think that is something that is to its credit, in addition to what you were saying before, that it tightens up a lot of Breath of the Wild and gives us so much more of a toy box.
Yeah, I mean, I famously on record many times said Breath of the Wild wasn't even in my top 10 Zelda games. This one breaks that and jumps into my top 10, probably my top 5, because the story is more fleshed out. The music is way more present, but also this is the first time a Zelda game made me cry. The ending of this game, the final moments with Link and Zelda are some of the most emotional stuff I've seen in a Zelda game. And I just like the characters in this. I think the Matt Mercer voiced Ganondorf is one of the most interesting versions of Ganondorf, probably since Ocarina of Time. I like Zelda in this because she has agency in a way she hasn't had. She still sort of needs to be rescued, but I think the way we're rescuing the princess in this is more interesting because she's helping you as well in a way that I just feel like we didn't see as much in other games. I just like this himbo version of Link who kind of fumbles his way through the world. And it's some of my favorite storytelling in a Zelda game in a long time. I think I'll always still be a bigger fan of the top-down Zeldas. Link's Awakening remake a year or two ago was like one of my favorites, but I think that this one definitely took what Breath of the Wild did well and improved upon it. I mean, they essentially gave us dev tools as game mechanics, and honestly, I love that and want that in more games.
I feel like the more you know about game design and programming, the more impressive that aspect of Tears of the Kingdom is. I am not somebody who knows a ton as far as hard numbers go, but I have many friends who do, and all of them, the more they tried to break the game, the more they were delighted by what they could get away with and what they could do. And for a series that, for a while there, certainly carried the reputation of single lock, single key, you can try everything, but the only logic is the one we give you. This one, put rockets on everything. Attach this to this. It is the long, long sword. Have fun. I think that sense of play and that sense of toy and the fact that your first ability is called Ultra Hand, which harkens back to one of the earliest, I think it was one of the first things that Gunpei Yokoi made, showcases that this is a game that, despite all of its seriousness, has a sense of play. Also a fun play with, you can be a legendary hero, but everyone interprets the legend a little differently.
Yeah, totally. I agree that this is the most we've seen them be toy makers in a while. I think Super Mario Brothers Wonder, which didn't make my list or my honorable mentions, but it's a game that I've played some of, also lives in that space in a way that Nintendo hasn't in a while.
Yeah, I liked Wonder.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. I wasn't blown away by it like a lot of other folks were. We've talked at length on this podcast and other episodes about how much I love 2D Mario games. That's a story for another time. Let's shift into my number 6. My number 6 is, of course, Marvel's Spider-Man 2. This is a perfect video game traversal game.
Spider-Man 2 is my number 3, so I think we can shelf that for a moment.
Yes, we'll come back to it. Then what is your number 6, Geoff?
My number 6 is Super Mario RPG, which I know is higher on the list for you.
Correct. So we will come back to that when we get to it on mine. So my number 5 is Slay the Princess.
And that is my number 4. My number 5 is Hi-Fi Rush,
which is higher on my list. So I guess we'll move on to my number 4 then. My number 4 is Super Mario RPG. So now we can talk about.
So let's go.
So Super Mario RPG is one of my favorite RPGs of all time. It's up there with Chrono Trigger, as I've said before. This might be the most perfect remake. Some of the name changes aside, which are irritating, but really don't hurt the game otherwise.
There are fewer than I thought there would be from what you were saying.
Yeah, there were enough major boss renamings that I was just kind of flabbergasted by. That aside, between quality of life upgrades and just graphical overhaul, the recompositions, which grew on me, this is the way you remake a game. I think the only one that was a better remake but wasn't as important to me as a game was Resident Evil 4. And I think that one, I would argue, was less necessary, only because, like, I love Resident Evil 4, the original, and it's a great game. We didn't need to modernize it for people to enjoy it, but I'm grateful for the remake because it's really good. Where Super Mario RPG, even though I could play the original a ton, I see the purpose of this remake, especially for modern audiences, because this is an entry-level RPG that I think is perfect for newcomers, but also has a lot of the fun tropes that people who love RPGs will really enjoy about this game.
Even back on the Super Nintendo with Legend of the Seven Stars, this was a game made to have fun with the legacy of Mario and the concepts of turn-based RPGs. One could argue it hews very closely to the original, but I think that is to its benefit. It was a very well-designed RPG back in the day, and it's still well-designed now. The little improvements are actually better transparency.
Yeah.
The amount of times where I wasn't sure if an attack could be time blocked or not, I learned what the indicators were, but they were all very obfuscated. They were all a little out there. And so there's a timing window that they give you. They provide those little guides that then gradually go away as you get better at it. There are other additions to that. Legend of the Seven Stars on the Super NES gave me a lot of moments of, am I doing this right?
Yeah.
I know I'm supposed to do something. Am I doing this right? The remake on the Switch does away with that, and I think that is to its benefit because there is great satisfaction in pulling those off, and you're not always going to get it right, and there are enough smaller pieces of that all layered on top of each other that stuff falls by the wayside, but none of it is left being like, I don't know what I'm doing. The original Legend of the Seven Stars had a lot of little secrets, little nooks and crannies in a linear story. Those are all kept. Your knowledge of the original is rewarded, but your ignorance of the original is not punished. And I think that is also a harder tightrope to walk for a remake than one would initially think. Playing through this, I blitzed through the game because I have played Legend of the Seven Stars enough times. I was still delighted, and it did not feel like a slog in any moment of it.
100%. I think that also the jokes still land. It's a funny game.
It
and
is.
the silliness still absolutely lands. Every time I go to Rosetown for the first time and do that play session and like get knocked on it's a delight. Or the Booster's Tower, which I think is one of the best areas in an RPG ever.
I love Booster's Tower.
The secrets and the running gags. Like there's a curtain you can walk behind in Booster's Tower, and when you go through it, Mario turns into the Super Mario Brothers version of his sprite. You can walk to one of the doors, you get shrunk, and then run back and change back. And it's never explained. It's just a gag for the player. There's a small boy in Mushroom Kingdom that you can jump on that runs in circles, and eventually you fall off and get dizzy and pass out. Those kinds of hidden things, that the fact that they are all still there and lovingly crafted and they didn't remove any of them, I think is quite phenomenal, actually.
I honestly was wondering when I got to Booster's Tower, I was confident that that curtain was going to be there. I wasn't sure if they were going to do the full, you're the original Mario Brothers sprite with the original music, or if it was going to be a graded process where you walk through it and you turn back to the Super NES graphics and it automatically changes to the classic sound font.
Yeah.
If you were already listening to the classic soundtrack, there would have been nothing to that. So that's probably why it wasn't there, but I was wondering.
Yeah.
But I'm not disappointed that it wasn't there.
Yeah. All in all, it's a great remake and a great game. And if you've been waiting to play it, I can't recommend it enough. 100%.
Agreed.
All right, Geoff, on to your number 4.
My number 4 is Slay the Princess.
Hell yeah.
Slay the Princess, it was your game of PAX East this year.
Sure was.
And it is a hell of a narrative about roles, about all sorts of things. You must slay the princess. Have fun.
Yeah, it's one of those games. I said it in my article, but like the less I say about it, the better. I think because the narrative, I mean, it's a visual novel and the narrative is key. And I did not expect the story to go where it goes. You know, it's very obvious from the demos and early advertising that there's time loop shenanigans and that you are meant to slay the princess. You don't know why. And you're trying to figure out why.
What is slay? What is princess?
Yeah.
What is the
game really questions everything, and it's just one of the best constructive narratives and some of the best voice acting I've ever experienced for an indie game with what seems like not a gigantic budget. 2 incredible voice actors. The young lady who plays the princess is a streamer. I've gotten to watch her streams. She's a VTuber and lovely person, a delightful human. Hopefully a future guest on the show. We've chatted a little, but both voice actors in the game do a bang-up job of just really kind of frameworking these 2 characters, the princess and the person here to slay the princess. And then, of course, the narrator as well. It's just so incredibly and smartly done. And like I said, I could gush about the individual moments, but I feel like that ruins this experience. It's only, I think, like 10 to 15 hours to play through a full cycle of the game, like a full. I recommend it. It's not expensive on Steam. It's often on sale. It's highly worth it. And I think really if you like visual novels and you like wonky stories with cool mysteries, this is definitely worth your time and worth playing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, Jonathan Sims and Nicole Goodnight put in fantastic performances, and those should be experienced.
Yes, absolutely. So go check out Slay the Princess. Of all the games on my list, like I think that's the one I would recommend the hardest just because it's just, this is video games, this is art kind of a thing, right?
It's a recommend to everybody kind of game, even if it's outside of your genre.
Yes. All right, we'll move on to my number 3, which we already mentioned was one of yours as well, which is the incredible Hi-Fi Rush. There's never been a game that's ever come out that more people DM'd me and went, Matt, this is a game for you. I hope you're playing it.
Yeah, right.
It is a stylish action rhythm game that has like this Scott Pilgrim-esque art style and sensibility and sense of humor. And it is one of the most incredible action games I've ever played. I'm a giant music nerd. And from the actual needle drops of major releases from artists to the incredibly composed original music that John Johannes and a bunch of other folks made for this game, it is musically one of the best games I've ever played. So much so that I included this in my article, reconstructed the playlist in timeline because the official playlist for Hi-Fi Rush on Spotify just kind of has all of the needle drops and then everything else, and also all of the streamer-friendly tracks of the needle drops. I made my own playlist that just has the needle drops along with the original compositions in order of when you experience them because I love the soundtrack so quite completely. I've never played another Tango Gameworks game. I know that they did Ghostwire Tokyo, which I want to play. I know they did the Evil Within games, which I've wanted to play. I'm sold. I want 3 more Hi-Fi Rushes after this. I don't know that we'll get them, but I want them.
Yeah, this is the only of their titles that I've played, and it was another that I got to it a little later than you did, but I knew from the get-go, from the announcement that, oh yeah, no, this is a game for me. I am a rhythm game fanatic. I'm a musician, a lover of all sorts of action things, and the amount of times I play games where I am trying to fight to the music, and it usually gets me in trouble. So to be rewarded for what I was going to do anyway is always going to get a big nod and a thumbs up from me. And yeah, the characters are wonderful. The cel-shaded graphics really add to the character of the world and of its players. And so it was one that the look and feel and concept and premise were very charming and drew me in. And the game kept the promise the whole way through.
Also, it was a strong contender for Himbo of the Year, as Chai is the biggest of idiots, and I love him for it. This is another one where the voice cast and the design and everything just really comes together. And yeah, I want more Hi-Fi Rush. I hope we get a sequel or a spin-off or something that uses this system again, because needle drops plus really great music plus stylish action is my shit, and I want more of it.
Yeah.
What's your number 3, Geoff?
My number 3 is Spider-Man 2.
Hell yeah. So yeah, as I wouldn't shut up about before, I love the traversal in this game, and I have to imagine you agree. I just think there has never been a game to move around in the space quite like this. I think the Arkham games came close, but there's something about web swinging, even from like Spider-Man 2, as we talked about in our retrospective episodes, the original movie-based Spider-Man 2, that kind of movement is just so satisfying when it works correctly.
Yeah, we've had traversal in 2D games. I'm not going to say perfected, but we know what the wheelhouse feels like. We have had many moments of great satisfaction in 2D movement. 3D games, from their popular release and inception, there's always been a bit of the limitations of where you can go. There's always been the sort of like weird stutters and hiccups, not just within the game itself, but within the evolution and where they go. And we have had great strides made in seamless traversal and movement and exploration. The Spider-Man series, I guess, as far as Insomniac is concerned, has really crystallized what good, seamless 3D traversal should feel like. And I hope that there are more games that have more cool concepts and ideas and executions of it. But at the moment where we're sitting, start of 2024, for me, Marvel Spider-Man 2 feels like the platonic ideal. And I can't wait to be proven wrong, but I'm not holding my breath. It's going to happen next week.
No, yeah. And as far as the combat goes, also greatly improved. The story is still one of the best Spider-Man stories ever. I think that Miles Morales still holds the title for the best of the 3 for me, because I just like how kind of zoomed in it is.
Yes.
And like just kind of how focused it is on Miles and his struggles. But this game is incredible. It gave me a set piece moment that I never thought I would get in a modern Spider-Man game that I still won't spoil, but that like literally when I finally posted about it in several Discords, several friends were like, I was waiting for you to get to this moment. One of my favorite versions of Venom, and as we said in the longer Spider-Man retrospective episode, hands down the best version of Harry Osborn, I think, in any form of media, balances that likability and then hate for the character or fear for his evolution in a way that I just don't think we've ever gotten before.
Yeah, no, I agree that Miles Morales has a much better zoomed in story, and I often feel like the better stories in video games are smaller ones or tighter ones. But Spider-Man 2, with the very seamless ability to switch between Peter and Miles, has that bigger exploration of character, an exploration of kind of the title thesis or the thesis statement of Spider-Man: great power, great responsibility. What you do with it, how you go about it, what will that power do to you? All big things writ large. What it's about is always there. It doesn't necessarily make for the same sort of great, let's go through it storyline, but I think it is a fantastic narrative that they have, and it's just a real fun game to play through.
Yeah, and I think still to this day, one of the best symbiote stories. It's very easy to make a bad one, a la Web of Shadows, as we've talked about before. But like, not just the set piece I keep alluding to that I won't spoil, but there are even moments with Spider-Man and MJ that happen later. Friend of the show, Flora Marigold, wrote an article about that moment and why it's important to video games. And I think it's worth reading if you finish Spider-Man 2 over on Epilogue Gaming. But like, there were cameos and other characters that showed up in this game that I never expected to see, and that weren't just, here's a cameo, here's a thing. It's like they were thought out. They were really well done. And I love that about the Insomniac series. Like, their older games, I've only played Ratchet and Clank, the remake. I've not played the older Ratchet and Clank games. And like, I really am a huge fan of these games, and it makes me want to go back into their catalog. I can't gush enough about how brilliantly this comes together. Even though assholes leaked it, I'm still excited for the Wolverine game. I have not watched any of that stuff. Like,
Same.
I know they're going to do a great job. I don't need to see pre-alpha footage.
Right.
Keep giving Insomniac different Marvel licenses. I'm here for it.
Yeah. I like what they do. I like the bold choices they make. I like that they are making it their own. And something like Spider-Man, you had the Ultimate Marvel series. You had the Ultimate Spider-Man series. And so there was enough remixing going on, and there's been enough interpretations. I'm enjoying the choices that Insomniac's making with their version of Spider-Man.
Yeah, I like that it gets to exist on its own, not 616. It's not the MCU. It's not the comics. It's its own thing. And I'm glad they were granted that freedom.
Agreed.
All right, on to my number 2.
Which is also my number 2.
Ha, Kismet. Love that. Our number 2 is Sea of Stars. What's interesting about Sea of Stars is that, like Chained Echoes mentioned earlier, people either loved it or didn't. And I can see people's complaints totally. I could totally understand why people didn't groove with this game. But as someone who grew up on 2 of the games that were most directly inspired to this game, it was impossible for me not to love it. I love The Messenger. I'm a fan of Sabotage Studios. When I heard they were making a Chrono Trigger and Super Mario RPG inspired throwback turn-based RPG taking place in the Messenger world, I was already on board. And after blitzing through this, thanks again to Tinsley PR for the review codes,
Yes,
really
very
grateful
much
for
so.
those. I blitzed through this game. I couldn't put it down. I just loved it. It was so brilliantly done, from the writing to the gameplay to the music. It's one of my favorite video game soundtracks, I think, ever, which in the same year's Hi-Fi Rush is kind of hard to reckon with, because that also was great. But yeah, I love this cast. I love the characters. I'm a big fan of Steven Universe, and I think that is a good framework for the narrative of this game. It doesn't have the highest stakes. It's not adult. It's not gritty, but it is a story at its core about friendship. And honestly, I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, it is a beautiful story, and it is a beautiful game. Plenty of games on my list and plenty of games we've talked about have been pixel art games or pixel art focused games. And nowadays, pixel art can do some truly beautiful things, even if they're technically 3D assets that they put pixels on top of or a pixel look. And I'm not sure what that is for Sea of Stars, but truly the worlds that they've built, the creatures and set pieces that they've made, the vistas that you see throughout are truly breathtaking. It is also a game that never takes itself too seriously, but never does it at your experience's expense. You find yourself in quieter moments finding truly dumb things while also acknowledging the stakes and the danger. I think you're right, Matt, in terms of having like a Steven Universe-ish mindset going into it, because there is danger throughout. In much the same way that like Chrono Trigger does, and in much the same way that a lot of those RPGs that we love from our childhood continue on. There's a lot of throwback games. There's a lot of games that seek to capture the essence of an older game. Sea of Stars is one of the most successful ones I've seen since Shovel Knight.
Yeah. I mean, I said when I beat this game that it might be my new favorite indie game of all time, which is saying something considering how much we both love Shovel Knight and how much I love Shovel Knight specifically. But it just hit. And like, I've talked about this in other places, and I think there's a bigger conversation to have. RPGs, unlike other games, I think are so reliant on hitting for you in the right way. And what you love about a game, someone else may not love. And I think it's integral to the enjoyment in a way that, like, you can fumble through a mechanically good game if you don't like the story, if it's an action game or whatever. But I think with RPGs, everything really has to work in tandem because of it's a role-playing game. I cannot imagine playing something missing from my list this year because I didn't get far enough in it. Baldur's Gate 3, if you don't like the gameplay or the story in Baldur's Gate 3, like if you only like one or the other, cannot imagine slogging through that entire game, right? In a way that, like, I didn't like the combat in my number one game, but the story and everything else more than made up for it.
Right.
I think that RPGs are very much more dependent on the intermingling of the systems, and the systems in this game are incredible. First of all, traversal in an RPG where you're climbing things and walking across tight ropes and other stuff that feels satisfying is really impressive. The dynamic lighting you were alluding to before, because you are solstice warriors who manipulate the sun and moon, the shading, the lighting, the setup of the scenes are so integral and so well done.
Yeah.
And then the combat, I mean, between the locks that you have to use special abilities to, like, stun enemies, to the timed hits, to the evolution of timed hits and these special moves and other things that you can do. Like, I think all of it just comes together in a perfect stew of an incredible game. I am considering buying it on the Switch just to replay it again, though I could just replay it on my Steam Deck. I want to throw money at this game. I'm grateful for our review copy. Really great to have been able to talk about it and base a whole episode this year about it and games like it. I love Sabotage Studio. Do I want a sequel to The Messenger? Yes. Do I want a sequel to this game? Sure.
Yeah.
But would I be perfectly happy to also get a third new game in a different genre in the same world? You bet your ass, because this is one of the few studios I would trust to continue to make those leaps at this point.
I think the big thing with our top 10 list has been, here are the studios that we enjoy what they do, and we're trusting what they're doing next.
Yes.
Don't blow it.
Yeah, I really love this game. It was my number one for a good portion of the year and was only dethroned very much towards the end of the year, and only barely so. I wibbled between my number one and number two probably until the minute I wrote my first article this year, which was like a month before the article on our site came out for Offshore Gamecast. That's when I locked it in, but I was still considering changing it for this list. So yeah, my number two and your number two,
Sea of Stars.
And now on to our number ones. My number one game of the year is Alan Wake 2. In a year where we've done a lot of introspection, thinking about side quests a lot, and how I launched that series with my probably nonsensical episode about Control, where I didn't talk about the narrative at all, and yet pleaded for people to play this game. It only felt right that before the end of the year, I did a side quest on Alan Wake 2, and that is my number one game of the year. For someone who's only played now, well, technically 4 games in their run of games, I love Remedy, and they might be my favorite developer. Obviously, I've praised Control for a long time. I'm excited for its sequel whenever it comes out. And I liked Alan Wake a lot when I played it after Control. Having played Alan Wake 2, seeing how they merge these worlds and just the stuff that they go for in this game, there's no one writing like Remedy. There's no one writing like Sam Lake. And there are other writers, and I don't want to just single out Sam Lake as like an auteur, because I hate that nonsense. But I do think that Sam Lake's vision of these franchises and this studio's vision of making games is just unlike anything I've ever experienced. And their use of full motion video in this game is not a gimmick. It just feels integral to the storytelling in a way they toyed with in Alan Wake 1. They toyed with a little more in Control and really went balls to the wall with in this game. I don't know what else to say about it at this point. I want to replay it. I haven't wanted to replay a game in a long time. I bought the entire Max Payne franchise and Quantum Break to play through more Remedy games. I started Max Payne as of when we're recording. I think I'm in the last part of the game, and I love it. It shows its age, but the sensibility of Remedy is even there back then with the fully acted still images, comic panels where Sam Lake is Max Payne. Really pays homage to what we see now in full motion video in Alan Wake 2. And it has the section we sing in the 4th chapter of Alan Wake's part of the story is one of the best gaming things I've ever experienced. I know it's sort of been spoiled, and I'm still trying so hard not to spoil it, because I think going into it only knowing very little about it just makes it better. I think it is easily one of the coolest things I've seen a video game do, and now I'm just in. Whatever Remedy does, I don't care what it is. I'm buckled in and I'm ready for it. Really excited for the DLC that's supposed to, I think, come out later this year. And Control 2, whenever I get it, please give it to me. I want it.
Fantastic. I haven't gotten to play it at all, so I will simply say that sounds incredible.
But now it is time for your number one.
My number one's Baldur's Gate 3.
Of course. Yes. You've played a lot more of it than I have.
And I haven't even gotten all the way through it. I still am confident that it's my number one because you know what? It is an imperfect game. It's still going to be updated. It's janky as all get out, and I love it. It is the over-the-top RPG, Dungeons & Dragons, tabletop, whatever experience I've always wanted. Playing through it in multiplayer has been an absolutely fantastic experience in terms of exploration, of mechanics, of characters, of story, of consequence. Without going into any grand detail of characters or anything like that, Baldur's Gate 3 has done a better job of having that feeling of a living, breathing world where your choices matter more than any other game that tries to do everything, from the Peter Molyneux coming out with Fable days till now. I mentioned before Gumbrella's sense of certain moral choices, but they are more to quest lines and smaller ideas, but that's what works for that kind of a game, where you have an exploring a larger world, where you have companions whose relationships rise and fall by your choices and the conversations you have and the time you spend with them, and not in a, now it is time to choose to spend the time with the person. You just do it. One of the reasons this shot to the top for me was in playing through Baldur's Gate 3 in multiplayer with my regular gaming group. Earlier in Act 1, two of the guys had already gotten through this part of the game, and so let me and my other friend kind of steer and drive and make some of the dialogue choices and whatnot, even if we weren't the ones in the conversation. And then very, very quickly, we would go to areas that they'd been before. It's like, oh, we know what happens. Wait a minute, that never happened for me. Wait, what is this? Even if we made the same general choices based on who we were, based on who we had with us, based on what we'd done and other small things, there was a lot of differences. And I have to salute Larian Studios' commitment to that level of detail, as well as their commitment to improving the game and updating it and not making things behind paid DLC. Day one DLC is still a thing. It's still a problem within the industry and still something that I scoff at. But they're not saying, okay, cool, these improvements are behind this paywall, or we'll put it all together and here's the next thing. It's all adjustments, it's all going, and they have that commitment to it. And a lot of the articles about Larian sort of ruining the curve as far as indie games or ambitious RPG titles, you know, some of them are taking the piss a little, some of them are a little exaggerated, but they are not without merit. I am looking forward to exploring the game more. As far as those sorts of games that are huge, epic, gigantic, I can't wait to start another run. I can't wait to start playing it again. Baldur's Gate 3 is absolutely at the top of the list for me right now, and I think it will be for quite a while.
I could have put it on my list, but I've not even gotten like 2/3 of the way through Act 1. I'm playing with some friends of the show, Matthew Finneman and Scott White, just like we did Divinity, Original Sin 2. You know, one of them has a young kid. The other one just had a baby this year. Congrats, Scott. And so, like, a lot's been going on, and so I haven't been able to play much. And I could play on my own, but I have so many other games to play. Why would I play this game that I know I'm eventually going to play through on my own as well? But all of your praise is definitely merited, and I do think it's an incredible game. I just don't feel comfortable ranking it so high when I've experienced so little of it.
Also, I feel like you could play through the whole game, and you will still have experienced so little of it, which is the thing. And so I think for me, Sea of Stars might be my favorite game of the year, but Baldur's Gate 3 is my game of the year.
I'm excited to play more of it in 2024, and I mean, I'm endlessly impressed with Larian. We've been lucky enough to chat with some of the folks who work at the studio, and like, I cannot wait to see what other stuff they've done. And this definitely changes the landscape of RPGs, especially CRPGs. I would love Larian to get to do other things. They've mostly just done a bunch of CRPGs, which are incredible. But like, if they become the CRPG studio, great. I'll take another one. I'll take a Divinity Original Sin 3. I'll take a Baldur's Gate 4. Either way, I am very excited to dive more in it, and it is definitely warranting of being someone's game of the year for sure.
Fantastic. Good list. Good lists.
Yeah, great lists. This was a fun way to engage with this, and I think a great way for us to actually know what the other thinks about the games we've both played. I was surprised we had so many similarities, and the fact that both of us had Sea of Stars at number 2 is always fun. I do want to throw out some other stuff before we start to wrap up. I have a game that I need to mention because it's the first game I've abandoned in many years. My greatest disappointment of 2023. And it's okay if you don't have one, Geoff, but mine was Sonic Superstars. I had really high hopes for this. It was like New Super Mario Brothers, but Sonic. But I should have read more into that because it absolutely was like New Super Mario Brothers, but with Sonic. The bosses were incredibly tuned up and too hard. The stages were kind of forgettable. The special abilities were fine. Like, they were trying to do some cool stuff. I liked the animated cutscenes, but all in all, it was a game I couldn't even get through because the third or fourth to last boss was so hard it took me 3 hours and I still couldn't beat it.
Yeesh.
My greatest disappointment of this year is Sonic Superstars. I'm optimistic about the future of Sonic Frontiers. If we get a sequel to that, I really liked it. But yeah, Sonic Superstars was just a horrible disappointment, and I'm bummed because I really wanted to love it.
Well, and I suppose by contrast, my favorite game from outside of this year that I played this year was Yakuza Like a Dragon.
There you go.
And getting into the Like a Dragon series, and when I was seeing all of my Nintendo, Steam, Sony wrap up of your year, and Sony does the kind of like, what games did you play most each month, and realizing how much of the first part of my year was dominated by finishing that game. I didn't forget how much I loved the game, but I was reminded of what a joy it was, and I got re-excited for Infinite Wealth. That was a nice little highlight there that's outside of the lists.
Yeah, same for mine. I mean, my favorite game I played was in my honorable mentions that didn't come out this year was finally finishing Disco Elysium. Just one of the most incredible RPGs I've ever played. The characters, the writing, like I could go on and on. If you've not played Disco Elysium, play Disco Elysium. It is a fantastic game. It is also worth looking into all the drama and stuff that's gone on with that studio. People Make Games have done an incredible job of looking into that stuff, but like Disco Elysium is a game that deserves to be in the pantheon of RPGs. It's just so brilliantly made.
Agreed.
A few others. Best Indie is normally a thing we do, but I don't know that we can this year because I feel like Best Indie by default is Sea of Stars. It was number 2 for both of us. I think that this year it's kind of obvious. I think for me, my favorite indie game that I've yet to play that I'm excited to play in the new year is Cocoon. I mentioned it earlier. I've heard incredible things about it. It's by some of the folks who worked on Limbo and Inside. It's a new studio, but it's some of that dev team. Unless you have any other shout outs, that's it for 2023.
Yeah, no, I've got my apology list going, and I think that's enough.
We apologize to these games we never played.
Pretty much.
I'm looking forward to this year. We've got some really cool ideas. We've got a couple of episodes that were supposed to happen last year that we pushed out that are going to happen this year, including stuff on the Analog Pocket, our Game Gear retrospective, and some more really cool stuff. I'm optimistic for this year in video gaming. Let's please have less layoffs. That'd be great.
Yes, please.
I want to throw that out there. Let us know what your favorites of the year were. What were some of the cool games that you played? If you have a top 10 games list, link it, comment, reply on Twitter. So many of my friends got to do some cool top 10 games of the year lists over on Giant Bomb. I want to know what your top 10 games of the year are. Were they any of our games? Were they completely different from our games? That's the thing about this year. You could have 10 favorite games that don't even come close to our 10 favorite games because there were so many games.
Yes, please send those over to us. Please let us know, since the way that you find new games is being told about them. And I definitely found a lot of games through recommendations this year. And I always appreciate that and love doing that for others. So let's keep that kind of thing going. Please get in touch with us. There's so many great ways to get in touch with us. You can find us across any social media platform we are on as of this episode at Fun and Games Pod. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. You can also find everything we've got going on our Patreon at patreon.com/funandgamespod. You don't have to pledge any money to be one of our patrons, but we do appreciate any and all that can and do for any amount of time that they can and do. And we would like to shout out the high scoreboard for today. And the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Roger Reichart, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Robert Prine, and Sean Bowen. Thank you so much for your support. please enter your initials. The ball drops in... Oh, it already dropped. Thank you for entering your initials.
Of course, as always, we are endlessly grateful for those who can support. If you've been considering supporting the Patreon and haven't pulled the trigger yet, please do. Again, there's a free tier. There is a trial tier for the top tier, so you can get to listen to our backlog of cool bonus content. Then, of course, there are the 3 main tiers. We really are grateful for everyone who contributes any time and money to this podcast. Thank you so much for it. Also, if you're feeling generous, and I hope you are at the end of this very strange year or beginning of this new year, again, timey-wimey recording stuff, please rate and review the podcast. The best places to do it are, of course, Spotify and Apple. It helps us get featured so other folks can find the podcast. But really, any podcast platform that allows you to rate and review us there. We would love to see it. We love reading them. We love getting them. And it really does make a difference in the life of a podcast. So if you haven't done it yet, please, as a New Year's resolution, do that.
Yeah, no, we absolutely do read these reviews. I mean, thank you, Boomerang Slash, for the short but effusive review on Apple Podcasts and the 5 stars. We appreciate it because, yeah, getting this out there, giving our recommendations and receiving yours is how we find new games. And we really couldn't do all of this, any of this, without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
Happy New Year and happy gaming. Hey.
Oh, hey, Geoff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV.
CertainPOV.com.